family rather enjoyed sharing their house with a ghost. What a nasty story. Only one Englishman. Despite the sunshine, it's actually starting to rain. I'm not going to lie, I've got lost already. I don't think it's haunted, but it's beautiful. Welcome to the historic town of Shrewsbury. I'm Juliet, I'm a writer and historian. This is Loki. Join us as we take you on a ghost tour around this very, very haunted town.
Little did I know that this was going to be my most chaotic attempt to film a ghost tour so far, taking 2 days.
Usually when I do historian and corgi ghost tours, I design them myself. I pull together my various resources that I have, collections of ghost stories about the area, pull them together and create a route. But this time, this was actually the book that gave me the idea to start historian and corgi ghost tours in the first place. This is Haunted Shropshire by Alan Scott Davis. And at the back of the book is a Shrewsbury, or Shrewsbury, depending how you want to pronounce it, a Shrewsbury ghost walk. And Scott Davis gives us a route through the town centre. It is unbelievably haunted. There are so many ghost stories on this route. Absolutely loads of them. And it's a walking route. And it was when I read this a couple of years ago that gave me the idea to do ghost tours, to take the dog out and do a walking route around the reputedly haunted sites in towns. This one is entirely designed by Scott Davis. I've changed the order slightly because I've chosen to start at the Abbey, also because the car park is there. So this is a really handy starting point. So I've very slightly changed the order of Scott Davis' walking route through the town. But otherwise, this is Alan Scott Davis' Ghost Walk through Shrewsbury. All of the ghost stories I will be reading and telling in this one will come from this book rather than the kind of mixture that I normally use. So, all credit to Alan Scott Davis, and thank you very much.
Spoiler alert, I will not be using a route designed by someone else again.
I am outside Shrewsbury Abbey. I know Shrewsbury best from the Brother Cadfael series of mystery books that were turned into a TV series on ITV back in the 90s, starring Derek Jacobi. So I thought I would start my ghost tour at the Abbey, because that's really what I associate with Shrewsbury.
The Brother Cadfael stories are historical mystery stories that are set during the Anarchy. The Anarchy was the first of 3 English civil wars taking place between the foundation of England during the 9th and 10th centuries and the present day. The second is the Wars of the Roses in the 15th century, and the third is the 17th century war known as the English Civil War, which we'll come back to. In 1120, King Henry I's heir William was killed in the White Ship disaster. In 1127, 1128 and 1131, Henry made his barons take oaths to support his daughter Matilda's claim to the throne. She was his only surviving legitimate child. But when he died in 1135, Matilda's cousin Stephen took the throne. Between 1138 and 1153, the two fought a civil war known as the Anarchy, eventually resolved when Stephen named Matilda's son Henry as his heir. Shrewsbury Castle was besieged by Stephen's forces in 1138, the same year that the remains of the Welsh St Winifred were brought to Shrewsbury Abbey, so it was a nice dramatic choice of location for Ellis Peters' series of novels about a mystery-solving monk, Brother Cadfael, based at the Abbey. Shrewsbury Abbey was founded as a Benedictine monastery in 1083, but the surviving part of the abbey was converted into an Anglican parish church after Henry VIII destroyed the monasteries in England between 1535 and 1541.
The only slight problem with following Scott Davis' route is that this was written a while ago. It came out in 2009, and a heck of a lot of his directions refer to businesses that are no longer in business or incredibly vague descriptions of buildings, sometimes to protect people's privacy, mostly just because whatever business it was he's talking about is no longer there. So that is the case with our first 2 sites, which are both near the Abbey. We are looking for a terrace of 3-storey houses and Abbey Lodge guest house, and Google tells me there is no Abbey Lodge guest house anymore. As for a terrace of 3-storey houses, well, there's a few options. So we will have a look around and see if we can identify them. Since the Abbey Lodge guest house is no longer the Abbey Lodge guest house, it's a bit difficult working out which building it is, but it is apparently haunted by 2 ghosts, one in the attic and one on the lower floors. It was renovated in 1985, and the proprietor at the time had a feeling of being watched. Then one of the builders working on it refused to work after dark because he felt uneasy and also felt like he was being watched. They had visitors from the BBC at one point. Shrewsbury is often used as filming location for various things. Not Cadfael, because it looks too different. But other things. So they had some visitors from the BBC who were woken up at 4 a.m. by loud banging and dragging noises from the top floor. And the proprietor couldn't account for those sounds. The top floor was semi-derelict with the staircase padlocked. No one had been up there for 6 months. So he went up with a dog and a friend to see if there was an intruder. Both of them refused to go past the middle bedroom, which was the source of the noise. They turned to leave, and as they were going downstairs, they could hear footsteps from within the locked room. Mr. Maull, the owner, put it down to traffic from the road, but a few days later his father was visiting, had gone to a nearby pub called the Dun Cow, which I suspect we are coming back to. Then, returning to the guest house, saw a face with unkempt grey hair looking out from the attic bedroom. He mentioned this to his son, and they decided to investigate further, and they took the dog. Always take the dog. This is why I bring the dog on all of these ghost tours, even though he's a maniac who's terribly trained, not trained at all, and pulls everywhere and doesn't do what I say. But you've got to take the dog for protection when you do ghost investigations. Anyway, opening the door, they could see the bedroom was empty except for a pair of curtains at the window. These suddenly parted as if someone was drawing them back to look through. The dog barked once, turned tail, and ran off. The following morning, Mr. Maull awoke to find someone shaking the back door of the house. And he could see no explanation for the shaking. The second ghost was that of a housekeeper dressed in grey, seen carrying a large bunch of keys. That's how you can tell she's the housekeeper. The housekeeper suddenly appears in one of the middle floor bedrooms and checks the linen cupboard before going on her rounds. According to Scott Davis, the daughter of a past landlady was the first to follow this ghost from the bedroom she was sleeping in to the resident's sitting room, and says she had sat on the lap of the old lady in grey who showed her a bunch of keys.
Birthplace of the father of evolutionary theory and famous naturalist Charles Darwin, and home of my favourite World War I poet Wilfred Owen, Shrewsbury was likely founded sometime in the 9th century CE. It is sometimes identified as Pengwern, an early capital of the Welsh kings of Powys, but this is disputed. The name Shrubsburg is Old English, meaning either fort in the scrub or Scrob's Fort. It is located in the borderlands between England and Wales, on the edge of the area once controlled by the Roman town of Wroxeter, or Wirraconium Cornawiriorum. By the 6th century, Wroxeter had gone into decline, and Shrewsbury, then located in the Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Mercia, was much more defensible, being surrounded by the River Severn on 3 sides. In 901, Aethelred and Aethelflaed, the lord and lady of the Mercians, met for a witan, a king's council, in Shrubsburg, modern Shrewsbury. It became the county town of Shropshire, and by the time the Domesday Book, the huge survey of England and parts of Wales carried out by William the Conqueror, was written in 1086, it was listed as a city. However, it is not a city now, it is a market town. Shrewsbury is also by far the most haunted location I have yet visited. Loki and I were on our second haunted site, and we hadn't left the grounds of the Abbey yet.
It's not always easy to tell which building Scott Davis is referring to. I think this is the building he's referring to when he says, if you head out of town down Abbey Foregate, which is here, there is a terrace of 3-storey houses with a friendly ghost. For many years, the Griffiths family shared their home with a ghost who would tap and knock in the cellar, but whenever anyone went to investigate, the noise would stop. It never happened at night nor on a Sunday. The door to the cellar has a Suffolk latch, and before the noise started, the latch would be seen to lift, then the door would open and close, and the latch would return to shut position, and the knocking would begin. The family rather enjoyed sharing their house with the ghost, and they named him Harry. But later on, a relative who was a boot repairer recognised the noise as the sound of somebody repairing footwear, and they discovered that a man called George Bromley, who was a cobbler, had worked as a cobbler in the cellar in a previous time. So they renamed the friendly ghost George instead of Harry, on the assumption that it was him.
From one of the several sets of terraces that I had decided was probably the haunted one, Loki and I continued down Abbey Foregate, headed for a lovely pub called the Dun Cow. The pub was founded as a hostel for the stonemasons and master builders who were working on the abbey by Roger de Montgomery, 1st Earl of Shrewsbury, around 1085. It gained its own brewery in 1105. During the English Civil War, the pub was used as a billet for soldiers serving under Prince Rupert of the Rhine, King Charles I's nephew. Technically, the Third English Civil War was fought between King Charles I and his Royalists, or Cavaliers, and Oliver Cromwell and his Parliamentarians, or Roundheads, from 1642 to 1646, eventually resulting in a victory for Cromwell and the Roundheads, England briefly becoming a republic, and the removal of Charles I's head from his body. Rupert's mother Elizabeth was Princess of Scotland and England, and his father Frederick V was briefly King of Bohemia. Rupert spent his childhood in the Netherlands and had already been a prisoner of war as a teenager and fought many Dutch and German campaigns when he came over to command the royalist cavalry for Charles I, bringing some Dutch soldiers with him.
Well, here we are at the Duncow Inn. Luckily, I got so delayed this morning that I've timed this ghost tour better than my tour of Stourport on 7, and the pubs are actually open. I'm not going around a parade of closed pubs. So I have got myself a non-alcoholic beer, because it's still quite early in the tour. This is a very haunted town and we have a lot to go. I'm not intending to do these ghost tours drunk, but I've got myself a nice non-alcoholic beer. The dog's getting a chance to sit down and calm down, and we can sit here and tell you about the ghosts of the Duncow. There are apparently 2 ghosts haunting this inn, or there were. When Scott Davis wrote this book in 2009, he noted that neither of them had been seen in some time, but there are reports from further back in the late 20th century of 2 ghosts here. The most notable is the ghost of a Dutchman who was executed for the murder of Prince Rupert's steward in the kitchen of the inn. The Dutchman was court-martialed and condemned to death, not surprisingly. A scaffold was erected in the stable yard, but before the execution, the Dutchman made a short speech saying it was grossly unfair that he, a Dutchman, should be executed for killing only one Englishman. Only one. And his ghost continues to make a nuisance of himself. One guest who was staying at the hotel had come back for lunch after looking around the town with his wife in the morning. He was in the men's toilets and he saw a tall man dressed in cavalier's uniform walking out of one of the toilet stalls. He thought that was quite funny, but soon became amazed when he turned around and saw the cavalier walk through the side wall. He rushed back to his table and the couple promptly left without their luggage. Later on, the man phoned the owner at the time, Mr. Hayes, telling him what he'd seen and saying he did not want to stay at the inn and that his wife would come in to collect their belongings and pay the bill. Poor wife. Did she want to? The Dutch cavalier has appeared in the bar and out in the car park, still protesting the punishment he received at the hands of Prince Rupert and his men. At the time Mr. Hayes took over the pub, he didn't know about these ghost stories, and one morning the whole family who were living here overslept, and when they looked at the clocks, every clock in the building, no matter what type, had stopped at 6:45 a.m, the time the execution was believed to have taken place. The family have also seen someone on the first floor, although this sounds like a different ghost because this, they said, looked like a monk who walks along the front of the building and through the walls. And we are, of course, not far from Shrewsbury Abbey, we're only just down the road. At one point, they were doing some renovation work in the bar area and workmen were working after the pub was closed, and they would often hear someone walk across the wooden floor from left to right and back again and along the front of the building on the first floor. This went on for a few nights, and one night they apologised. They were clearly making too much noise and keeping a member of the family awake. And the owner said there was no physical way anybody could walk along the front of the building because there were 3 walls across the route and the floors were carpeted and wouldn't make that noise. At that, the workmen left quickly and would only work at night in pairs afterwards. But Scott Davis does note that the last sighting of the monk was in 2003, and nobody's seen the Dutch cavalier for some time either, at the time of writing the book in 2009. And the owner in 2009 had heard noises but not seen anything, and therefore was hoping that maybe the spirits had moved on. The ghost spirits, not the alcohol spirits. I feel like there's a really good pun there, but I think I missed it. I'm going to sit here for a few minutes and finish my drink before we head on to the next site, which is also a pub.
Having finished up at the Duncow, I dragged Loki across the English bridge, and I do mean that literally. He wanted to stop and sniff every inch that had been weed on by another dog. So we immediately stopped in at the next haunted pub, the Nag's Head, a 15th century pub with some 19th century alterations to the building.
I wasn't actually going to stop here at the Nag's Head Inn. I was just going to walk past and talk about it. But Loki is just not trained. If anyone has any dog training tips, let me know. He's absolutely wild, and dragging him across the English bridge to get here was so exhausting that I have had to stop for coffee. On the plus side, it's a very, very pretty pub, so I will talk about the hauntings at the Nag's Head here and then we'll carry on. Apparently, during renovation of this pub, the Nag's Head, in 1982, workmen discovered a secret room. It served no useful purpose in the renovation and the space was resealed. Since then, footsteps and the sounds of heavy breathing have been heard coming from the secret space. 3 times, these have been accompanied by loud crashing noises that have been violent enough to set off the burglar alarm. Lights have frequently been turned on and off, and the jukebox has suddenly sprung into life. Scott Davis also notes that there is a more sinister story associated with this inn. High up in one of the attic rooms is a small cupboard, and on the back is a crude painting of an old prophet, and it is said that if anybody looks at this painting, they will go mad. He suggests this may have been the reason for the deaths of 3 people who lodged there. The first, a coachman in the mid-1700s who had just landed a prestigious job with the local lord and was celebrating in the bar. But he did not appear in the morning, and the landlord went upstairs to find him hanging from a beam in the room. And Scott Davis says a tall man in a long coat has been seen walking the corridors at night and wonders if it's him. The second mysterious death was of a young lady who had recently been engaged and was very excited and planning her wedding. Her fiancé was going to take her to meet his parents. But when she went to her room, people heard screams just before she threw herself out of the window and under the wheels of a coach and was killed. And finally, an army officer who had survived the trenches in the First World War was found shot dead with his own service revolver opposite the open cupboard door. After that incident, the room was finally sealed shut. People passing through the darkened alley that runs alongside the Nag's Head Inn often report seeing the flicker of candlelight moving about in the closed room. And obviously, part of the point there is that these people appear to have killed themselves, even though at least 2 of them were extremely happy immediately beforehand, which is part of the mystery. We have so many sights to see. We really need to hurry up a bit. I'm going to finish my coffee, and then we're going to walk past quite a lot of haunted sites, which I will likely tell you all about in voiceover.
Loki and I continued up Weil Cop, looking for a street with the fabulous name of Dogpole. Our route took us past 2 more haunted sites, the Henry Tudor Inn and the Lion Hotel. The Henry Tudor Inn is a 15th century brewhouse and inn, renamed the Henry Tudor Inn from the Old Lion Tap to commemorate the fact that Henry Tudor, the future Henry VII, stayed there on his way to the Battle of Bosworth in 1485. This was the climactic battle of the other English Civil War, the second one, the Wars of the Roses, in which King Richard III was killed and the throne was taken by his distant cousin Henry. According to Scott Davis, during the 1970s, when the building was standing empty, there were many sightings reported of men and boys in Tudor period military uniforms, as well as faces suddenly appearing at broken windows and dogs refusing to pass that side of the passage. We did pass by that side of the road on our way back to the car on day 2, and Loki did stop a couple of times, but I have to be honest, Loki randomly stops walking for no reason at all the time, so I'm not sure we can draw any conclusions from that. There are also reports of builders being pushed around and their tools knocked over when a number of objects dating from the 1400s were found in the walls and under floorboards during some renovations. The disturbances stopped when the objects were returned. Almost next to the Henry Tudor Inn is the Lion Hotel, a 16th century coaching inn. Coaching inns were a bit like motorway service stations in that they provided food, drink and somewhere to sleep for human travellers and stables, food and drink for horses. Plus the opportunity to change tired teams of horses for a fresh one, so you literally leave the horses you've been using there and you get fresh horses. The hotel apparently has a famous and very classic ghost, a woman dressed in a powder grey ball gown who glides down the stairs and into the ballroom and vanishes. She apparently brings with her a sense of peace and tranquility, and was once caught briefly in a publicity video. She honestly sounds like just the coolest ghost, and I would rather like to meet her. We didn't go into this one, though. We'd already been into 2 haunted pubs as it was. There's also a middle-aged man who sits in a corner seat at the bar nursing his drink before trying unsuccessfully to stand up and then vanishing. And it sounds like quite a lot of people might have seen him and just mistaken him for another customer.
Where do we need to turn, eh?
Having finally located Dogpole, we were not so successful in locating the building Alan Scott Davis refers to as Ye Olde House. We did not see that name on anywhere we passed, though we were walking fairly quickly, so we might have missed it. It was the family home of the Rock family for many years, and apparently a ghostly figure surrounded by a glowing mist has often been seen going into the cellar, accompanied by the smell of frying bacon. Sometimes the sound of someone chopping wood can be heard, along with whispering voices and footsteps along the corridors. And at other times a small child has been seen crouching down behind a large plant pot. That last one honestly sounds like the creepiest to me. Can you imagine suddenly finding a creepy child ghost hiding behind your houseplants? Shrewsbury is extremely well supplied with both pubs and churches, and at the top of Dogpole we reached St Mary's Church in the centre of St Mary's Place and opposite the Parade shopping centre. A very fancy looking shopping centre, which I did not try to go into with Loki. This is a 19th century building in the Greek Revival style and was originally the Royal Salop Infirmary, a subscription hospital. That is, a hospital where if you paid a subscription, you got free healthcare. Subscription services are maybe older than you think. Between Henry VIII's destruction of the monasteries used to run the hospitals and infirmaries in the medieval period, and the establishment of the NHS in 1948, voluntary and subscription hospitals, often funded or sponsored by wealthy benefactors, were the main option for significant healthcare outside of private home visits from doctors. Scott Davies reports that a number of ghosts haunt the building, mostly nursing staff. A hospital matron, presumably recognisable from her uniform, apparently glides along an area that was once a ward, and is tall, thin, and with an air of authority. A nurse also walks through an area that was once operating theatres and is now luxury apartments, and seems to be checking instruments. Though he doesn't say how anybody knows this, as presumably they can't actually see any instruments. She's checking something anyway. Another nurse dressed in a white uniform used to be seen standing at the ends of the beds of patients who were going to die that night. But thankfully, and perhaps obviously, this particular spirit is no longer seen now that the building is no longer a hospital. Finally, people on security duty at night have apparently heard screams, moans and cries echoing through the centre, but without a sense of harm, though personally I think I would find that a very unpleasant experience even if it was harmless. After a quick delayering because it was getting warm, Loki and I took a detour down the charmingly named St Mary's Water Lane to Traitor's Gate. On the 22nd February 1645, during the Civil War, a parliamentary captain and burgess of Shrewsbury called John Benbury was instrumental in the capture of the royalist-held Shrewsbury Castle. A burgess is a freeman who can act as a representative of a town or city. The parliamentary force was able to get through the town walls at St Mary's Watergate, now known as Traitor's Gate for this reason, and a fight briefly broke out in the town square before the castle surrendered. 6 years later, an army under the future Charles II was defeated by Cromwell's forces at the Battle of Worcester, and among the captured royalist troops was John Benbury. No one knows why he changed sides, though the execution of Charles I in 1649 had caused a number of parliamentarians to rethink their cause. Benbury was taken to Chester for trial, found guilty of treason against the Commonwealth of England, the government led by Oliver Cromwell, and returned to Shrewsbury to be shot by a firing squad in the grounds of Shrewsbury Castle. His body was hung from the gate now known as Traitor's Gate, and apparently people walking near the site of the long-vanished gate have sometimes seen a skeletal figure hanging from the archway that remains. After that quick detour, Loki was distressed to discover that we had to walk back up the hill we had just walked down to continue down Castle Street to the castle. There has been some kind of fortification at Shrewsbury since it was founded, while the first form of Shrewsbury Castle proper was built here on the orders of William the Conqueror in 1067 and was developed into a major Motte and Bailey fortification by Roger de Montgomery later that century. Motte and Bailey castles were the primary type of Norman castle built in this period, consisting of a mound, the motte, with a wooden keep on top of it, and below it a larger fortified area, the bailey, and there would be people living there and craftspeople and so on. The castle was seized twice during the anarchy, first taken by supporters of Queen Matilda and then besieged by King Stephen, and it was rebuilt in stone as the hostilities died down and the war ended in the 1150s. During the 13th century, Shrewsbury was at the heart of English-Welsh hostilities, and the castle was attacked in 1215 by Welsh Prince Llywelyn Fawr, or Llywelyn the Great, and after that defensive walls were built around the whole town, and then it was attacked again in 1234. However, its importance declined after the Welsh lords were forced to swear fealty to Edward I in 1282, and it had more or less collapsed by 1443. It was converted into a wealthy private home during the Elizabethan period. It was refortified in preparation for the Civil War in 1642, but as we have seen, surrendered to parliamentary forces in 1645. Nearly 20 years later, it surrendered to royalist forces under Charles II in 1663, and then it was used as a private residence again until the 20th century. It is now the Soldiers of Shropshire Museum, formerly the Shropshire Regimental Museum, and had survived another attack when it was firebombed by the Provisional IRA in 1992.
Shrewsbury Castle is now the Shrewsbury Soldiers Museum. It was the Regimental Museum and it's closed on Mondays, and I doubt they allow dogs. But the haunted area is in fact the area behind me here, I think, which is the lawns in front of the castle. Apparently, a notorious villain called Blundy Jack or Bloody Jack has been seen on the lawns dragging a screaming naked woman by her hair, followed by a group of shadowy figures. In the 10th century, this man would lure innocent young female victims with the promise of marriage and riches to where he lived, where he would imprison and assault them. In a final act of cruelty, he would cut off their fingers and toes before throwing them to his followers. And when they had tired of them, the victim would have her throat cut and be thrown into the river. Eventually, the townspeople got to hear of these murders and raided the castle, which was a wooden Motte and Bailey castle at the time, and captured Blondie Jack. He denied all knowledge of the murders, blaming his men. As one was being led to the gallows, he shouted to the baying crowd that Blondie Jack kept tokens of his victims in his room. Following a search, the rotting fingers and toes of 24 women were found. Such was their anger at the fate of these women that Blondie Jack was bound, tied, drawn behind a horse to the top of Wild Cock to be hung, drawn and quartered. His head was put on a pike outside the castle walls and the rest of his body was thrown to the river. What a nasty story. Thankfully, it's a beautiful sunny day today with no mysterious screaming ghosts.
Just opposite the castle is the local library and record office, which was once the site of Shrewsbury School. Shrewsbury School is a public school. If you've seen my ghost tour of Rugby from last year, I blethered on for ages about the complexities of the British school system, so do check that out if you haven't heard of these. But the TLDR is that public schools are, counterintuitively, the poshest and most expensive private schools in the country. In the 17th century, this building was the main school building, until the school moved to a bigger site outside of the town in the 19th century, having been listed alongside Eton and Rugby as one of the 7 great schools in the Public Schools Act of 1868. Famous alumni include local lad Charles Darwin, Andrew Sandy Irvine, who died alongside George Mallory on Mount Everest in 1922 and may or may not have been one of the first people to summit, since no one can agree whether they died on the way up or the way down. And also one of my all-time favourite writers, actors and travellers, and my inspiration for doing history-themed travel vlogs like this one, Sir Michael Palin from Monty Python. Of course, only Darwin actually attended the school in this building. The old school building, now town library, is apparently haunted by a grey lady who has been seen by cleaners working at night and in the early morning. She walks around the building, and a security guard once saw her walk through a rack of books and then vanish. No one knows who she is, though Scott Davies suggests perhaps she was a matron at the school, checking up on the boys, or the wife of a past master. From there, it was a short walk to the railway station, which was first opened in 1849 and extended in 1901. Scott Davies calls it the gateway to Wales and the North, and I can confirm from personal experience of navigating trains to North Wales that this is pretty much true. It is said to be haunted by a Victorian councillor for the town who was killed in an accident in 1887. He was waiting on platform 3 in a horse-drawn hackneyed carriage when a heavy snowfall caused part of the cast iron and glass roof to collapse and fall on him, injuring the horse and driver and killing the councillor. Scott Davies says a man's shadowy figure stands and sometimes sits near the ramp entrance from Castle Gates and checks his pocket watch. Why this would be the unfortunate councillor, who was presumably sitting in the carriage when he was killed, Scott Davies does not explain. A hooded figure has also apparently been seen appearing from an underground service tunnel and leaving the station after the last train has left, whom Scott Davies speculates might be a monk, presumably on the basis that any mysterious figure in a hood is probably a monk, and despite the fact that all the monasteries in Shrewsbury were dissolved by Henry VIII several centuries before the invention of railways. From the railway station, we were once again forced to walk back up a hill we had just walked down, Loki once again unimpressed, looking for the old police house and jail off St Mary's Place, which we failed to find because, as I discovered later, it is not in fact off St Mary's Place at all. I was so busy looking for the police house, we actually missed another site. You can just about make out the sign for W.H. Smith's here, which I'm surprised to see as all their high street shops are being closed down or becoming T.G. Jones. This was once a tea room and dance hall, but apparently another hooded figure can be seen in the 11th century basement, and that one really could be a monk, though Scott Davies does not say so this time. It has another ghost upstairs, a beautiful young woman whom Scott Davies says has a habit of decaying in front of the eyes of the presumably horrified witness. That sounds like a really good idea for a horror movie. Footsteps can also be heard in the old ballroom on the first floor, and staff have heard music and singing when working in the stockroom that was once the tea room. Eventually, we walked past the back of the Prince Rupert Hotel, to which we would return on day 2, and found ourselves outside St Alkmund's church. St Alkmund was an Anglo-Saxon prince of Northumbria who had fled into exile following Viking attacks in the late 700s. After seeking refuge with the King of Mercia, he was tracked down by his Northumbrian rivals and murdered, and his body was laid to rest at Derby, which later became a major Viking stronghold. St Alkmund's is claimed to have been founded by Aethelflaed, Lady of the Mercians. Aethelflaed was a daughter of Alfred the Great, sister of King Edward the Elder, and married to Aethelred, Lord of the Mercians. She governed the Kingdom of Mercia unofficially when her husband's health declined, and she organised defences against renewed Viking attacks in the 890s. She built defences at Wednesbury, Bridgnorth, Tamworth, Stafford, Warwick, Cherbury and Runcorn, and in 917 she sent an army to capture Derby, the first of the 5 boroughs of the Danelaw to fall to the English. According to tradition, Aethelflaed retrieved the bones of St Alkmund from their original resting place in Derby and brought them to Shrewsbury. It's possible that St Alkmund's was built after this campaign, replacing an older church, probably the predecessor of the medieval Old St Chad's. St Alkmund's has the highest steeple of the many churches in Shrewsbury, and apparently the devil is in the habit of climbing it several times a year to look out towards his chair at the Stepperstones, a rocky outcrop in Shropshire whose rocks were supposedly brought there by Old Nick himself. This legend comes with a ghost story attached to it as well. Supposedly, a steeplejack, which is a craftsman who specialises in working on tall structures, was drinking in the nearby Loggerheads pub and bet that he could climb the steeple and push the devil off his perch. While at the top, waving at the crowd below and drunk, he lost his balance and fell to his death, breaking his back on one of the graves below. It is said that on warm nights the man can still be seen climbing the steeple and then falling into a cloud just below it. By this time, Loki, who is still not the fittest of dogs after all his medical procedures, was starting to get tired, and I was running into some problems myself.
Right, well, I'm exhausted, Loki's exhausted, we're going to be late to pick up my son from school. My husband will sort that, but I need to go, childcare. We can't find half of the site. We've got completely lost with the directions. So I think at this point, we're just going to catch a couple more sites if we can on the way home, get back to the car and get ourselves home. And maybe we'll come back to Shrewsbury and try and finish off the ghost tour another time.
So, back we came the next day for more ghosts.
Hello! We are back for day 2. Now, I should say you can absolutely do this ghost walk in a day. The reason that we have had to do it over 2 days, we got held up leaving the house yesterday morning, life stuff, and we had to be back for the school run. So, you could do it in a day. It just might be a fairly full day out. The other thing I will say is I'm very grateful to Alan Scott Davis for the idea and for the collection of stories, but the route he's set out is not the easiest to follow. It involves going back on yourself repeatedly. You keep going past the same places, and I'm sort of expecting all of the sites in one place to be in one place in the walk, and they're not. They're sort of spread. Anyway, suffice to say that in future I will stick to designing my own route for ghost tours and not trying to use someone else's. But I am very grateful to Alan Scott Davis for giving me the idea to do these ghost tours in the first place. And it's an enormous collection of stories from Shrewsbury that he has collected. So, we carry on. We are going to head back over English Bridge into the town, and we're going to start at the beginning of Scott Davis walk and then skip a bit that we already did yesterday and then finish off the end. We are on a time scale because I have to be back home for a Teams meeting shortly after lunch. So we're early in the morning, the pubs will be closed. We are going to do a mad dash around trying to get as much as possible. Let's get on with it.
This time I tried to find the start of Scott Davis' route, though in the end that took me a while. As it turned out, day 2 ended up being even more chaotic than day 1, though we did at least catch most, if not quite all, of the sites we were looking for. We started out by walking confidently across the English Bridge from the car park, but then immediately went wrong by heading out onto the town walls instead of going back up Wild Cop again. I still had not quite understood just how close together some of the sites were, including sites that were right at the beginning of Scott Davis' itinerary being practically on top of sites listed right at the end of it.
I'm not going to lie, I've got lost already, partly because I can't follow the map or the directions and hold the dog and hold the camera. So I've walked the town walls by accident. I walked past the cathedral, that was interesting, but now I found a map. So I'm going to work out where I am, I'm going to find the nearest site, and I'm just going to go from there.
As I hurriedly turned up Belmont, because I was pretty sure it was going to lead me to somewhere I could pick up the ghost walk, I just missed another site. It's the tiny grey building you can just about see in the very corner of this shot here. That is the town walls tower, the last remaining intact bit of Shrewsbury's medieval defences, built between 1220 and 1242 when King Henry III was fighting the Welsh, though the watchtowers may have been added by Henry IV about 200 years later. The tower is now owned by the National Trust and you can rent it as a holiday let, but if you do, be aware that it is apparently haunted by 2 children who were killed in a fire in the late 16th century. Loki and I stopped for a quick break at Old St Chad's, which local tradition says was founded by King Offa of Mercia. In 1889, an item that may have been a shroud pin or stylus from the 8th century was found at the site. And when the church was being demolished about 1790, observers reported seeing fragments of Anglo-Saxon sculpture in the walls, which unfortunately no longer survive. Right next to Old St Chad's is the Golden Cross Hotel, formerly the Golden Cross Inn, a 15th century building that was once the sacristy for the church. That's the place where the church plate and vestments are kept.
We have now reached the Golden Cross Inn, which is currently being blocked by that DHL van behind me. After refurbishment of the inn in 1975, some guests and staff have felt a sense of being watched and have seen a monk kneeling as if in prayer, possibly connected to the time the building was used as a sacristy. The monk has also been seen fighting off an invisible enemy as he tries to protect what silver was left in the church after the Civil War, or at least that's the assumption. I mean, he's fighting an invisible enemy, so how do you know who the enemy is? But it was used as a royalist retreat during the Civil War, so, van going past, that is why that is the assumption.
The Golden Cross stands on Princess Street, number 25 of which is also apparently haunted by the ghosts of 4 children who died in the same late 16th century fire that reached the town wall's tower. Their mother also died, and her ghost rushes up the stairs, and her grief can be felt, which sounds horrifying, and I had no desire to linger on that one. They aren't the only ghosts in there, as a spectral young woman can be seen hanging from a beam in the old servants' quarters, having apparently been mistreated by her employers. From Princess Street, Loki and I made our way through the Golden Cross passage to the decommissioned church of St Julian's.
Behind me is the old church of St Julian's, which is no longer used as a church. It is now the St Julian's Centre. There is apparently a ghost haunting one of the graves in front of the church overlooking Wild Cop. In the mid-1800s, a man was found dead at the nearby Lion Hotel who died in his sleep, but his effects were used to pay for his burial, and he was buried one evening. That night, the night he was buried, the watchman who patrolled the town reported hearing howling, screaming and banging coming from the graveyard. The following evening, the same gruesome screaming was heard by people walking past the graveyard in a small alley. It was only when the vicar heard the noise that anything was done. He had the mystery man exhumed and found that the man had not been dead, but was suffering from a sleeping sickness which gives the appearance of death. When the coffin was opened, the inside lid... Oh, there goes a bus. When the coffin was opened, the inside lid was scratched and covered in blood. The fingers were raw to the bone, and there was a terrible look of horror on the man's face. The vicar was so shocked he took to his bed and later transferred to another parish. And to make sure the man was dead this time, a stake was driven through the heart once the doctor had tested the corpse for vital signs, because he was, by this point, actually dead. And to this day, the screams of the man can be heard late in the evening. Luckily, it's first thing in the morning right now.
At that point, we had a lucky break.
We finally made it to Fish Street, which is where we were supposed to start yesterday. A very nice local tour guide taking his own live tour group around the town reassured me that this was the right street. And there is, in fact, a pub sign with fishes on it, just to confirm that this is Fish Street. Scott Davis says there used to be a shop selling shirts and ties called Oriole in this street, and the owner, Mrs. Jackson, while stock taking, had locked the door and was working in the stock room when she heard someone say something. She was shocked to see a shadow in the shape of a tall man standing by the back wall of the shop. He appeared to be having a conversation with someone. Turning on every light in the shop, she watched as the figure by the wall turned away as if talking to someone else and then vanished in front of her. And she didn't stay too long after that. There have been several sightings in the shop by people walking by at night and shop staff. I don't think that shop is still here, so I'm not completely sure which of these buildings it was, but we have at least found the street at last.
From Fish Street, we headed up to Butcher's Row past the Abbot's house, which dates back to the 15th century and is another building where soldiers were billeted during the Civil War. This one sounds rather creepy. Some people have reported not only feeling like they are being watched by some supernatural being, but actually developing breathing difficulties, which is honestly a lot more actually scary than a lot of real-life ghost experiences. Some of them sound scary because they're sad or nasty or just feel unpleasant, but this is a rare case where the experience seems to be actually threatening the health and safety of the living, and that's very rare in real-life paranormal experiences. People staying in the hotel opposite have also repeated seeing ashen faces looking out from the top floor windows. Part of the ground floor is currently home to a very nice-looking wedding dress shop. I'm already married, but I have a terrible weakness for pretty wedding dresses, and their windowsill gave me a very useful spot to stop and set myself up for a bit of filming about the hotel. The hotel opposite the Abbot's house is the Prince Rupert Hotel. The first foundations of the building were laid in the 12th century, with substantial building work taking place in the 15th and 17th centuries. You've probably already guessed that it is named the Prince Rupert Hotel because Prince Rupert lived there while serving as Lord President of Wales and Captain General of Shropshire during the Civil War, raising and training armies to fight for the royalist cause.
We've reached Butcher's Row, and behind me is the Prince Rupert Hotel, which used to be called Jones's Mansion and was used as the base for Prince Rupert. A lot of men had lost their lives in battle, and in room 7 there is apparently the ghost of a young man hanging from a beam, which has caused several people to request another room. I don't blame them. Even the staff have seen some ghosts there. Often people on the early shift in the kitchen or in the storeroom see a Civil War soldier going through a sealed-up door. At one point now, it was recent in 2009, a production of A Christmas Carol was filming here, and some of the crew were staying at the hotel. After dinner, 3 members of the crew were heading off to bed, joking they had yet to see a ghost, and then they saw an elderly gentleman walking towards them in a nightshirt and sleeping cap. I mean, I think they'd been working too long on A Christmas Carol by the sounds of things. A candle was burning in his handheld candle holder. They moved to one side to let him pass, but before they could say anything, he smiled and walked through a closed door. And they spent time in the night bar after that. Maybe they'd just been doing A Christmas Carol for too long.
The hotel's website notes that there are also rumours of an eerie feeling and lurking ghosts in the 12th century cellars, which were once part of the town walls and which have only recently been rediscovered. The hotel's owners are having them converted into a wine tasting space, because obviously mysterious spooky encounters and lots of alcohol are a perfect combination. After turning away from a gorgeous-looking shop that was closed and also didn't allow photos, which wouldn't be helpful for a vlog, Loki and I rudely pushed our way through the ever-so-helpful tour group who had helped us out earlier to walk down the bare steps, from which we found our way to the Old Market Square.
There's Grope Lane, which is just amusingly named. Well, we're going to go down Grope Lane anyway, just because it sounds like fun. Suddenly, a big wide street and a Starbucks and a Waterstones. Hey, we found the modern centre of the town. Oh yes, that would be the marketplace.
Walking past the Old Market Hall took us to the Old Music Hall, now the Shrewsbury Museum and Art Gallery. Dogs aren't usually allowed in museums, so we didn't go in, and I'm not sure if the old stage is still there. But if it is, a ghostly dandy has often been seen off stage right, flicking his face with a large handkerchief, and this used to be taken as a good sign for any show in production. From there, having got directions again from a very helpful workman who was not at all surprised when I told him I was trying to follow, with apologies to Mr. Scott Davis, the worst written directions in the world, we turned towards Claremont Hill. As we did so, we passed another haunted site. Rowley's house, which used to be a local history museum, is the large white timber-framed building you can see ahead of us here. It is a late 16th century warehouse attached to an early 17th century brick mansion, currently unoccupied. When it was in use as a museum, a fine lady in period costume, and Scott Davis does not actually specify which period, but something old, was sometimes seen lying on one of the 4-poster beds upstairs. Much earlier, when the house was a private home in the 1800s, a man dressed as if from the same unspecified time period was seen by servants and family members walking upstairs and along the corridors. Museum staff much later in the 21st century also reported feeling as if someone was walking behind them when locking up at night, but not someone threatening, rather someone guarding their safety. We pressed on, however, and walked up Claremont Hill to the Quarry, a big open park opposite the current St Chad's Church, and once I got over stepping in some dryish dog poo, we sat down to look around.
We have reached a lovely park known as the Quarry, presumably because it used to be a quarry, which we're sitting having a rest in. According to Scott Davis, the area was used in the 1600s to burn witches and murderers. Now, not all witches were burned. Many people, men and women, mostly women accused of witchcraft, were hanged. In England, it depended on the crime you were accused of. So if you were accused of heresy or treachery, and that included murdering somebody of a higher social status than yourself, which if you are a woman includes your husband, then you would be burned. If you were accused just of witchcraft, then you were more likely to be hanged. So just to clear that up. But and it varies across different parts of Europe. Methods of execution for witchcraft varied, and of course, famously in America, in Salem, it was usually hanging. Anyway, we carry on. According to Scott Davis, one woman who was burned at the stake was a Mrs. Foxall who murdered her husband after he beat her. She broke loose from her burning stake and ran screaming towards the townsfolk in flames. And on the anniversary of her death in November 1647, she's seen to run past the dingle heading towards St John's Hill, which is in this area. So she would have been burned because she murdered her husband, or was accused of murdering her husband. Sounds like she did murder her husband.
Loki and I had a quick look around the Enchanted Garden just because it sounded nice.
Don't think it's haunted, but it's beautiful.
And then we retraced our steps as far as the new market hall before turning onto another fabulously named street, Shropshire, home to the Hole in the Wall. This site actually combines two 17th century pubs, the Hole in the Wall and the Market Vaults, both built over the remains of a 13th century manor house. The part that was once the Market Vaults is apparently haunted by a woman called Lady Sarah, who appears after hours and walks through a modern wall. Scott Davis does not explain how or why this ghost has been identified as Lady Sarah, other than people putting together a known tragedy and a ghostly experience. Sarah was a young woman who lived in the building in the 14th century and had arranged to meet her Welsh lover in Old St Chad's courtyard, but she was caught by her family and starved to death in the cellars of what is now the pub. We didn't have time to stop at the Hole in the Wall, so we headed back towards the old market hall to look at the map and try to locate the last few sites on Scott Davis' itinerary, a rather random collection of places we had missed because either we got lost and couldn't work out what street they were on, or they were in buildings identified by Scott Davis as things like the former wine merchants, which was unhelpful. However, that turned out to be the end of our tour because disaster struck.
Right, slight update. Loki has stepped in some broken glass or something and is bleeding from one of his paws. He doesn't seem bothered and he hasn't yelped and the blood's drying up, so we think we're okay, but I am going to take him to the vets this afternoon just to get him checked over. I don't want him walking around with broken glass in his paw. I also lost the magnet holding my microphone and my t-shirt down my bra in the middle of the town square, and I had to fish it out of my bra in the middle of the town square. So, all in all, I think our best option at this point is to take the shortest possible route back to the car. If we happen to pass any other sites on the way, we'll catch them. But Loki's health comes first, so we are going to need to head for home at this point, I'm afraid. Well, he seems to be walking okay, so he can't be that injured. Yeah, he seems all right. Well, we'll get him checked over anyway, just to make sure.
I took Loki back to the Abbey by the shortest route, where we stopped for a comfort break before getting in the car, and to pick up a poo bag I had accidentally left behind earlier and suddenly remembered about halfway down the street. We only missed 2 haunted sites from Scott Davis' itinerary. One of these we almost certainly walked past, but the building was impossible to identify because Scott Davis described it in terms of a business that has long since shut down. He referred to it as the former Peter Dominic's Wine Merchants, so it wasn't even operating as that business in 2009. Apparently, an employee once saw a mysterious man in a blue suit standing by the window. This was somewhere between the old Shrewsbury School and St Mary's Place. The other was the old police house and jail, which I was particularly sorry to have missed. I really wanted to see that one. Scott Davis' directions were that it was down a little alleyway opposite St Mary's Place. I searched all over St Mary's Place on the first day and I couldn't find it. It turns out, as I discovered from some furious Googling when I finally got home after day 2, that this is because it's on a road called Castle Court, which you access off Castle Street and not opposite St Mary's Place at all. So I guess I'll just have to go back there another day. The police house is haunted by a policeman from the 1890s who was found hanging in one of the cells, his hands trapped between the rope and his neck. Some believe he had committed suicide but had second thoughts but was too late. Others believe a local gang who had been making threats against him carried out a murder. He is frequently seen in the holding cell or standing close to the entrance of the building, either as head and shoulders only or as a uniformed figure without the helmet, trying to say something which is never heard. The old jail across the lane is also haunted. Scott Davis describes this as a very mischievous spirit who walks various items of stationery across the main upper hall. I'll just have to go back there another day to see that one. I'm not sure when, if ever, I will end up doing such a stuffed full ghost tour again. We covered 24 haunted sites with a whopping 34 ghosts. Scott Davis' tour, including the ones we missed, has 26 sites haunted by 37 ghosts. I suspect I will be coming back to Shrewsbury at some point, as a lot of these deserve to be looked at in more detail and really could make videos by themselves.
If you enjoyed this absolute mess of a video, then please do give it a like. If you enjoy my content that isn't about the sitcom Ghosts, if you could give it a like and a share, that would be awesome, because the YouTube algorithm thinks the sitcom Ghost is all I want to talk about. I do love the sitcom Ghosts. I do like to talk about other things though, so that'd be really helpful if you could, thank you. If you'd like to support the channel, Please do buy some merch available from my website. You can see the t-shirt I'm wearing, there's lots of stuff. Or one of my books, Creepy Classics, Ghost Stories from Ancient Rome, and Creepy Classics, Ghost Stories from Ancient Greece. There'll be a third book coming out in a few weeks, Creepy Classics Haunting Tales for Winter, which I'm really excited about. I'm busy working on that now. Hopefully the next ghost tour will be a bit less chaotic. I think it'll be a while before I do another one, just because of practicality and timing and fitting it in, but they will be back next year, if not before. I will design my own route in future. Lesson learned, always design your own route for these things. Don't try and follow someone else's, because I had no idea where I was going. I could not follow those directions. I had no idea of the sense of that route. I think it had a lot to do with how many back passages there are in Shrewsbury. So you were up and down all these little back passages, but if you missed one or started in a different place like I did, then it all kind of got messed up. So anyway, all's well that ends well, hopefully. And until next time, bye. I can't even do my little wave. My hands are awful. Bye.
Just to reassure everyone, Loki is absolutely fine. It was a very, very minor injury to his claw. It just bled a lot, so it looked really dramatic. But he is absolutely fine and completely back to normal already.